During Sunday lunch, my son's new girlfriend shamelessly demanded $2 million for a luxury wedding. Everyone was smiling. I stayed quiet. Suddenly, I felt a note from my son under the tablecloth. "Dad, she's a con artist. Help me." I looked at her. I smiled calmly and said only 2 words. "Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is right now in your time zone." My name is Frank Sullivan. I'm 64 years old and I live in Pasadena, California. I spent 30 years of my life appraising properties for banks, title companies, and the courts. A certified appraiser. That's what they call me on the official documents. An amount of real estate passed through my hands that would make most people sweat. I learned only one thing with absolute certainty in that time. Everything has a real value and an apparent value, and the difference between the two always comes to light. I retired 3 years ago. Now I spend my mornings among potted peppers. Black cobra, datil from Florida, wild Texas chiltepin. I'm a member of the Southern California Capsaicin Society. We meet on Sundays at the farmer's market. Serious people who understand that cultivating a fine pepper requires patience, exact temperatures, and knowing when not to touch anything. Every now and then, a real estate attorney calls me for a consultation. I accept if I find it interesting. If not, I tell them I'm busy with my plants, which is the truth. My son, Ernie Sullivan, is 34. He's a manager at a construction firm, makes good money, is responsible, and is a genuinely good person. That last part he got from his mother, who is no longer with us. The rest, the stubbornness, the tendency to trust people entirely too soon. He got that from somewhere I still haven't clearly identified. 3 months before the Sunday I'm going to tell you about, Ernie called me on the phone with that voice kids use when they want you to get excited, right along with them. "Dad, I met someone. Her name is Lillian. She's different." That's how it all started. I met her 2 weeks later at a dinner Ernie organized at a restaurant in Old Pasadena. Lillian Vance, 32 years old, well-dressed, with that confidence in her speech that is either genuine or heavily rehearsed. From the very first handshake, something in my head clicked. It was the same click it made when I reviewed an appraisal with numbers that just didn't add up. Everything looked good, too good. The price was inflated. Her younger sister, Mallory Vance, came to that dinner too. 29 years old, less brilliant than Lillian, but far more observant. While Lillian talked, Mallory watched. She looked at the watch on my wrist, looked at the cut of my sport coat, looked at how I reacted to every single thing her sister said. I let her look. You learn a lot more by observing the observer than the one doing the talking. I got home that night, poured myself a glass of water, and wrote 3 words in my notebook. Review, document, wait. In the following weeks, Ernie talked about Lillian with increasing frequency. How smart she was, how she had great values, how she wanted to get to know me better. Every time I asked a concrete question, what exactly does she do for a living? Where is her family from? Ernie responded with generalities he had clearly absorbed from her without a second thought. That worried me more than any specific answer could have. One Sunday morning, Ernie called to confirm he was coming over for lunch. "Can I bring Lillian and Mallory?" I said yes. I prepared slow-smoked beef brisket the right way with a homemade dry rub, garlic, and hickory wood. I set the table in the dining room with the embroidered tablecloth, the one my mother left me. In this house, Sunday dinner is not a casual affair. It never was. They arrived at noon. Lillian walked in first, gave me a kiss on the cheek that smelled of expensive perfume, and immediately started praising the house. The garden, the colors, the layout, all with a precision that wasn't admiration, but an inventory. Mallory followed her, smiling quiet, her eyes scanning the space like a barcode reader. Ernie closed the door behind them with the face of a happy man, or a man working very hard to look happy. We ate well. The brisket turned out exactly as it should. Lillian asked for the recipe with just the right amount of enthusiasm to seem interested without committing to ever cooking it. Mallory ate slowly and spoke little. Ernie was animated. He made jokes, tried to keep everything flowing. I listened and served. It was after the second course when Lillian opened her bag and pulled out a beige, letter-sized folder with an event planning agency's logo on the cover. She placed it on the tablecloth with a naturalness that must have cost her. "Quite a bit of practice, Mr. Sullivan," she said, "and that way of addressing me has always felt like a weapon disguised as respect. Ernie and I have been talking about getting engaged, and we wanted to share our ideas for the wedding with you." She opened the folder. There were printed quotes, photographs of venues, lists of vendors, everything organized, everything calculated for a wedding fit for the Sullivan family. She paused strategically before saying the number. We would need around $2 million. The silence that followed lasted exactly as long as it takes a man to process a figure he wasn't expecting. $2 million. A venue in Aspen, a florist from New York City, a photographer from Paris, 300 guests, a 3-day event, all explained calmly, as if she were pitching a project in a corporate boardroom. Mallory nodded from her chair with the expression of technical support. Then she added, looking directly at me, "After all, Mr. Sullivan, you aren't spending that money anyway." Ernie didn't say a word. I looked at him out of the corner of my eye. His shoulders were slightly hunched, his eyes fixed on his plate. The posture of someone who knows something is terribly wrong, but doesn't know how to say it without breaking everything apart. I picked up my coffee mug and took a long sip. Lillian was looking at me with that smile that waits for confirmation. "How interesting," I said. And that was all I said. The conversation carried on. Lillian talked about dates, about seasons, about why Aspen was the ultimate choice. Mallory backed up every point. I nodded every now and then, asked minor questions, listened. Ernie stayed quiet. But at one point, right when Lillian turned to show her sister something on her phone, I felt something in my hand under the tablecloth. A small, folded piece of paper that Ernie passed to me without moving his arm. With the discretion of someone who has been waiting a long time for the perfect moment, I slipped it into my suit jacket pocket without opening it. Shortly after, Lillian suggested we take our coffee out on the terrace to look at the garden. The two women stood up. Ernie followed her. I said I'd be out in a minute, that I was going to the kitchen. I closed the kitchen door, took out the paper, and unfolded it carefully. Ernie's handwriting, rushed but legible. "Dad, she's a con artist. Help me." I read it twice. I folded it again. I put it in the inside breast pocket of my jacket, right next to my heart. Not for poetry, but because that's the pocket with a zipper. I filled the small green plastic watering can I keep by the sink. I went out to the backyard, watered the Texas chiltepin, which was a little dry, then the daytil, then the black cobra, which this week had pushed out 2 new shoots at the base of the stem. The voices from the terrace drifted over, muffled. Lillian was laughing at something. Mallory, too. I finished watering. I washed the watering can. I put it back in its place. Then I went out to the terrace to have my coffee. When I got back to the terrace, Lillian was holding her phone out to Mallory, showing her pictures. Floral arrangements, tables with white linens, string lights over open spaces facing the mountains. They were both talking with the energy of someone already living an event that hasn't happened yet. Ernie was standing by the planter with a mug in his hand that he hadn't even touched. He looked at me when I walked out. There was something in his eyes I recognized. The same face he made as a kid when he knew he'd done something wrong, but was still hoping the problem would fix itself. I set my mug down on the patio table. I sat down. I waited for Lillian to finish showing her sister the last photo. "Lillian," I said in a low voice, but clear enough, "show me the documents." She looked up a fraction of a second before the smile snapped back into place. "What documents, Mr. Sullivan?" She laughed lightly, like someone brushing off a joke. "This is just an initial chat. Nothing is signed yet." "I understand," I replied. "But before we talk about $2 million, I need to see your birth certificate, your residential history for the last 5 years, and a certified credit and background report. It's not distrust, it's just how my brain works after 30 years of dealing with property deeds." The silence that followed was of a different quality, denser. Mallory was the first to speak. "With all due respect, Mr. Sullivan, that sounds like an insult." "With all due respect," I answered, $2 million is not a chat." Lillian held my gaze for a few seconds, then put her phone in her purse with highly controlled movements. She stood up. She said it was getting late, that they had to go. Mallory followed her immediately. Ernie walked them to the door with the expression of a man trapped between 2 tectonic plates, neither of which had asked for his opinion. I stayed on the terrace and finished my coffee. The black cobra pepper in the large planter rustled its leaves in the afternoon breeze. I watched it for a moment. This pepper takes almost 90 days to mature from the time it's transplanted. You have to control it, watch it, give it exactly what it needs and absolutely nothing more. If you rush it, the fruit turns bitter. If you wait too long, you lose it. 90 days. That seemed reasonable to me. When it got dark, I sat down at the desk in the living room. I pulled out a brand new notebook. I saved them for matters that require clean documentation and wrote on the cover, Appraisal Subject Number 1. August 2025. I opened my laptop. I have access to several databases I used for years to run background checks on properties. County records, federal court dockets, open access public registries. I typed Lillian Vance, California, approximately 32 years old. Nothing in California. I expanded the search nationwide. 20 minutes later, I found what I wasn't looking for, but what didn't surprise me to find either. A civil suit in Phoenix, Arizona, 3 years ago. Defendant, Lillian Vance. Cause of action, asset dispute. Resolution, private settlement, terms confidential. I printed the page, placed it in the new notebook, and wrote over it in pen. First indicator, confirm. I locked the notebook in the top drawer of my desk. Then I took out my phone and searched my contacts for Rachel Donovan, attorney at law, Colorado Boulevard, 3rd floor. I had met her the year before when a neighbor asked me for guidance on a complicated estate. Professional, direct, no beating around the bush. Exactly what I needed. I sent her a text. "Rachel, I have a matter. When can you see me?" I left the phone face down on the desk. There was an afternoon when Ernie was maybe 12 years old. His bicycle chain broke 3 blocks from the house. He came walking up carrying the bike, covered in sweat, looking like the world had ended. I asked him what happened, he explained. I told him, put it right here. I went to the toolbox, took out the spare master link I always kept, and in 15 minutes the chain was fixed. It wasn't hard. It was knowing where to look and having your tools in order. Ernie looked at me that afternoon like I had done something extraordinary. What I did was ordinary. The difference was in the preparation. I thought about that tonight while I waited for Rachel to reply. I also thought about the first time I brought Ernie along on a field appraisal. He must have been 16. I think it was an apartment building in West Hollywood. I explained how to calculate the price per square foot, how to spot unpermitted remodels, how a freshly painted facade can hide dry rot in the framing. He asked me, how do you know the paint is new? I answered, because it smells different, because there's no dust on the molding, because somebody wanted you not to notice. Ernie nodded, very serious. I never forgot that face. Early the next morning, a text came in from Rachel. Tomorrow at 10, if that works for you. It worked for me. Before going to that appointment, I did one more thing. I called Paul Evans, a senior real estate attorney with an office on Green Street. I worked with him for years, long enough that when I call, he knows it's not a social visit. I asked him for an emergency consultation to pull the current title on my properties, to see if there were any recent liens, any movement on the deed that I hadn't authorized. He told me he'd pull it that afternoon and call me back. He called at 5. Everything was clean, nothing recorded without my knowledge. Good. That night, Ernie called me. I was expecting the call. He had the voice of someone who had rehearsed what he was going to say. Dad, Lillian is very upset. She says you treated her like a suspect. Ernie, I replied calmly. I didn't treat anyone like anything. I asked the questions you ask when someone proposes moving $2 million. But it's not like that. She's not asking you to sign anything today. No, not today, I paused. Ernie, how much do you know about her history? Where did she live before? She has family in Los Angeles. Silence on the other end. Dad, don't go looking for problems where there aren't any. I'm not looking for anything, I said. I'm just looking. There's a difference. We hung up cordially, but without warmth. That was information, too. I sat at the desk a moment longer. I took the folded paper out of the drawer. I opened it again. Dad, she's a con artist. Help me. Ernie's rushed handwriting. The words of someone who knows the truth but lacks the tools to defend it. Only I had them. I opened the new notebook to the second page. I started writing a list. What did I need to verify? In what order? With what resources? The list had 8 points that night. Before the end of the month, it would have 15. Rachel replied to my second message with a single line. I reviewed the Phoenix file. There's another one in Las Vegas. Same pattern. Authorize us to track down the plaintiff. I closed the laptop. I went to check on the black cobra pepper one last time before bed. The new shoots were firm. This was going to take time. The exact amount of time it needed. Not a minute more. The next morning, I arrived at Rachel Donovan's office with a folder under my arm and the file I had put together the night before. The printout of the Phoenix case, my notes on the names, dates, and the pattern that was clearly beginning to take shape. Rachel kept her desk perfectly organized. Every paper in its place, every file labeled, which gave me immediate confidence. Messy desks and poorly constructed appraisals come from the exact same place. I laid it all out for her in 15 minutes. No dressing it up, no drama, the facts. A woman who asked for $2 million at the very first family lunch, with a history of property litigation in another state, and a sister asking highly specific real estate questions disguised as casual conversation. Rachel listened without interrupting. When I finished, she opened her laptop and reviewed the docket I had found. The Phoenix file, she said, is an asset dispute. Lillian Vance is listed as the defendant. The case was closed via private settlement, confidential terms. There's no guilty verdict, but there's no exoneration either. What there is, she took a brief pause, is a pattern of someone who knows how to move through the legal system without leaving a clean footprint. I gave her the full mandate. Civil history for Lillian and Mallory Vance. Title searches in California, Arizona, and Nevada. Verification of tax liens, and a sweep for any marriage or civil union registered in the national database. I asked her how much time and how much money. She told me 2 weeks, minimum $500 for the initial investigation. I handed her half right there in cash with a receipt. She logged it without blinking. Walking out of the building on Colorado Boulevard, the California sun beat down hard on the pavement. I walked to where I had parked my car with that feeling I recognize from when an appraisal starts, to take shape. There are no answers yet, but you already have the right questions. And the right questions in this line of work are worth more than any rushed answer. That same afternoon, I got a call from Ernie, Dad. His voice had that tone that mixes affection with deep discomfort. Lillian says she's still waiting for you to apologize about the documents thing. I breathed slowly. What documents, Ernie? The ones you asked her for on Sunday. She says it was humiliating. Ernie, I answered without raising my voice. I didn't ask her to sign anything. I asked for basic information before committing a sum of money that takes a lifetime to earn. If that's a humiliation, then she's right to not want to show them to me. Silence on the other end. Don't go creating problems where there aren't any, Dad. I don't create anything I observe. I paused. How are you doing, son? Good, he said, but he sounded like someone answering on autopilot. Good, I repeated. Hey, do you know what states Lillian lived in before she moved to California? Another, longer silence. I don't know exactly. Up north, I think? Why are you asking? Just a father's curiosity, I said. Take care. I hung up and called Paul Evans at his law office. I asked for an urgent appointment, wanted an updated certification on my property in Pasadena, with a verification of any recent encumbrances. He told me to come in the next day at 11. That night, while I was checking on the daytail pepper, which hadn't set its second fruit in weeks, the doorbell rang. It was past 7. I opened the door and found Mallory Vance on the porch with a smile that had clearly been practiced in front of a mirror. Mr. Sullivan, please forgive me for dropping by unannounced. It's just that Lillian is so embarrassed about how Sunday ended, and she wanted me to tell you on her behalf that she never meant to offend you. I let her in. I offered her water. I sat across from her with the exact same focus you use when sitting across from someone who says one thing but is looking at something else. She talked about the wedding, about the stress of planning massive events, about how Lillian just wanted everything to be perfect. I nodded. As she spoke, her eyes scanned the living room. The paintings, the potted plants in the hallway, the bookshelf holding the property folders I'd left there 3 years ago, the side table next to the armchair with the closed notebook. Every object received a few seconds of attention before she kept talking, like someone taking inventory, while desperately trying not to look like they're taking inventory. I'm an appraiser. I've spent 30 years learning to see what people are looking at when they think nobody is watching. And then, with a naturalness that almost seemed genuine, she asked, "And the house, Mr. Sullivan? Is it directly in your name? Or do you have some kind of trust or special legal entity?" I looked at her for a second before answering. "I keep it in a pepper pot," I said. "The Texas chiltepin, specifically. It's a very rare variety to find." Mallory blinked. She forced a smile. "How funny." "Yes," I replied. "Thank you for coming, Mallory." She left 10 minutes later. I closed the door and wrote in the notebook. Mallory, direct question regarding the legal ownership of the house. Reconnaissance mission. Confirms a coordinated strategy between the two sisters. They know what they are looking for. I underlined the last sentence. A while later, as I was making some dinner, I got a text from Rachel. It came in at 9:47 p.m., which for a lawyer actively working a zoo case is perfectly normal. "Frank, there's another file, this time in Las Vegas. Same scheme as Phoenix. There's a man's name involved, Robert Ellis. Authorize us to track him down." I read it twice. I turned off the stove. I replied with a single word, "Yes." I went to check the chiltepin before going to bed. It was in its spot by the patio window. Small, discreet, with that harmless appearance that makes people underestimate it right up until they taste it. I relate to that pepper more than any other in my collection. I gave Rachel precise instructions. Find Robert Ellis through the Las Vegas court docket. Identify his current address, and if possible, establish formal contact before making any direct calls. Rachel told me that for this kind of fieldwork, it was best to bring in a private investigator. She had a professional contact, someone specializing in asset tracking and background checks. His name was Charlie Monroe, with an office in downtown LA. He wasn't anybody's friend. He was a professional with a clean record and an hourly rate. I told her to go ahead. While Monroe worked, the week rolled on with a calm that I knew was purely surface level. Ernie called twice. The first time to ask if I had reconsidered my stance. The second time to tell me that Lillian had found the perfect venue in Aspen and that the booking window was closing soon. In neither of the calls did I mention Rachel or Monroe. I responded with questions. "Do you have a written contract?" "How many years has this agency been in business?" Ernie replied with increasingly long silences. Paul Evans saw me at 11 in his downtown office. He reviewed the request I'd sent him the afternoon before, and without much preamble, he printed the clean title certificate for the Pasadena property. Appraised value of $3.4 million, no mortgages, no liens, no recent preliminary notices, everything in perfect order. I asked him casually, "How complicated would it be to transfer a property into an irrevocable trust?" He explained the process. A drafted deed, filing it with the county recorder. Estimated time, 3 to 4 weeks with all the paperwork in order. Estimated cost, round 2, $500 in legal and recording fees. I took notes. I didn't tell him why I was asking. He didn't ask either. That's what makes good real estate attorneys good. A week later, Monroe had results. We met at a coffee shop near the farmer's market. I arrived 5 minutes early. Charlie Monroe was a man in his 50s, average build, with the face of someone who has learned not to be surprised by anything. He arrived on time, ordered a black drip coffee, and placed a thin folder on the table. Robert Ellis, he began, skipping the small talk. 58 years old. Businessman out of Henderson, Nevada. Building materials supplier for 20 years. Met Lillian Vance 3 years ago. The relationship lasted 7 months. He opened the folder. Timelines, photocopied documents, handwritten notes. During the relationship, Lillian convinced him to sign a purchase agreement on a condo in Henderson. The reasoning was it would be their marital home. Value, $1.1 million. The signing was done through a private escrow agent, not a standard title company, with a clause allowing the assignment of rights to third parties. The marriage never happened. 2 months after the breakup, the condo showed up under the name of an LLC registered in California. It took Robert 2 years to get it back through the courts. He spent $150,000 in legal fees. Monroe closed the folder and slid it over to me. Is he willing to testify? I asked. You'd have to ask him that, but he doesn't harbor any fond feelings for Miss Vance. I paid the agreed-upon $900 in cash with a receipt. Monroe finished his coffee, nodded, and left without any drama. That afternoon, I called Robert Ellis. I introduced myself with my full name and explained the situation in 3 sentences. My son. The exact same Lillian Vance. The exact same pattern. There was a brief silence. How long have they been dating? He asked. 3 months. Then you got there just in time. I asked him for one single thing. A written affidavit, notarized, detailing exactly what he went through. Not for a trial just yet. It's for my personal files. Robert said yes, no conditions, no requests. His voice had that mix of relief and contained rage that only belongs to someone who has been carrying a heavy weight for a long time. And finally, finds a place to set it down. 2 days later, Ernie called, his voice tight. Dad, Lillian talked to an event agency. Venue in Aspen, catering, music, photography, honeymoon. The deposit is $60,000, and we have to wire it this week or we lose the date. What's the agency called? Unique Moments Events. Why? Bring me their articles of incorporation, their Urzine letter, and their state business license. If everything is in order, we'll talk. They didn't have it. Ernie called me the next day. The agency was still processing some paperwork. I had already verified it. Unique Moments Events LLC. Registered 4 months ago. Minimum capital, 0 commercial history. I explained it to Ernie calmly. This company does not exist in practice, and a $60,000 deposit under these conditions isn't an investment. It's a scheduled loss. Lillian is going to be furious, he said. Probably, I replied. That night, just past 9, Monroe sent me a photo from a restaurant in downtown LA. Lillian and Mallory sitting across from a man in a dark suit and gray tie. Several open folders spread out on the table. The man was talking. They were listening with the intense focus of someone taking mental notes. Monroe's text came 30 seconds later. The guy is a shady title fixer. Handles interfamily deed transfers. History of highly questionable transactions. Keep at it, I replied. Keep at it. I know what's in those folders. I locked my phone. I went to check the black cobra pepper. 2 new shoots since last week. This pepper likes partial shade and exact watering. Not too much, not too little. It requires patience and a clinical eye to know when to intervene and when to let go. I was starting to understand precisely how all of this was going to end. The photo Monroe sent me that night, I reviewed it 3 times. Not because I didn't understand it the first time, I understood it perfectly, but because some information deserves more than one look before you act on it. The man in the dark suit with the folders on the table wasn't a wedding guest, nor a financial advisor hired to plan the future of 2 lovers. He was a guy who makes a living moving properties between people who don't always want it known that they are moving them. The scheme Lillian was building had a logic I had seen before, not in frauds, but in legitimate real estate transactions that were structured poorly. First, a good faith deposit, the advance for the event agency. Then, a marriage under community property laws. And finally, a sale where Ernie, as the spouse, would sign away full rights to 50% of any asset acquired or commingled during the marriage, including my house in Pasadena, the one I spent 20 years paying off, the one that didn't have a single dollar of mortgage left on it. I took the paper out of the top drawer. I'd had it since the very first Sunday, folded in 4, kept in my inner suit pocket, and then locked in the drawer. Ernie's hurried but legible handwriting. Dad, she's a con artist. Help me. I stood there for a moment with the paper in my hand. I thought about how he passed it to me. With that discreet movement under the tablecloth, his face turned away so Lillian wouldn't notice. I thought about how hard it was to say nothing in that moment, to get up, go to the kitchen, and water my peppers with the same calm as always. And I thought about the 2 words I told him when the women walked out to the garden, speaking in a low voice before Lillian turned around to look for him. I know. Ernie looked at me. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. I folded the paper and put it away again. Then I dialed Paul Evans' number. I set an appointment for the next day at 10 a.m. at his Green Street office. I told him I'd be bringing documents and that I needed to start a process we had discussed weeks ago. He said he'd be there. That night I prepared the folder: original deed to the house, official ID, a recent utility bill, Ernie's birth certificate. Everything the attorney would need to kickstart the creation of the irrevocable trust. An irrevocable trust is a legal structure in the U.S. that protects property in such a way that no third party, not a spouse in a community property state, not a creditor, not a civil lawsuit, can touch it without the express authorization of the trustee. In simple terms, the house would cease to be mine in the ordinary sense and would pass into a legal entity where I maintained control. But Lillian, even if she married Ernie tomorrow, would have absolutely no right to claim a single square foot. The process would cost around $500 and take 3 to 4 weeks. I had the funds, I had the time. The next morning, I arrived right on time at Evans' office. Mahogany desk, bookshelves lined with the California Civil Code, his Bar Association diplomas. I handed him the folder. He reviewed every document in silence, with the deep focus of someone who has been doing this for decades and knows exactly where to look for problems before they appear. Trust with whom as the fiduciary, he asked. Whichever bank you recommend, you've worked with all of them. And the beneficiary, my son, Ernie, with a condition of responsible administration, no specific date or triggering event. Evans nodded and took notes. He didn't ask why. You don't ask those kinds of questions in a law office when the transaction is completely legal and the paperwork is pristine. I signed the preliminary instructions and left a retainer of $500. Evans said the deed transfer would be ready to file with the county recorder in 3 weeks. I walked out onto the street with the receipt in my pocket and the black cobra pepper on my mind. That pepper takes 90 days from transplant to the first ripe fruit. I was less than a month in since Lillian put her beige folder on my Sunday tablecloth. There was still time. That same week, Ernie called me with a new tension in his voice. Dad, Lillian wants to talk to you. She says she's thought about it a lot and wants to start from scratch, no friction. Good, I answered. Tell her to come over whenever she wants. Seriously, I'm always happy to listen to her. There was a brief pause on the other end. Dad, are you okay? Perfectly fine, son. Tell her I'm right here. Ernie hung up with a silence that I interpreted as relief mixed with profound confusion. It was good that Lillian thought she was gaining some ground. The plants that grow without any resistance are the ones that snap easiest in the first strong wind. 3 days later, Rachel called me at 6 p.m. She had that tone of a lawyer who has found something massive and wants to deliver it, precisely before the excitement distorts the facts. Frank, the vital records search came back positive. I waited. Lillian Vance entered into a civil marriage 7 years ago in the state of Florida. The certificate is in the Miami-Dade County Registry. The marriage was never dissolved. There is no divorce petition filed in any family court in the states we checked. She is married, Frank. Legally married. If she marries Ernie, we'd be looking at a felony under state law. Exactly, I said. Bigamy. Up to 3 years in prison. I hung up. I sat at my desk for a moment with the notebook open. I wrote a single line. The subject property has a hidden lien that invalidates the entire transaction. I didn't act immediately. That's what separates an experienced appraiser from an impulsive one. Knowing that information without verified documentation is utterly worthless. Rachel had found the record, but we needed the certified copy of the marriage certificate from Florida with the official county seal and signature for that data to be something more than just a note in a folder. I gave her precise instructions. Request the certified copy through official channels, expedite it if necessary, and wait. The process would take 10 to 14 business days. Bureaucracy has its own schedule, and I, at that moment, was the only one on either side of the board who knew that time was playing in my favor. While the document was traveling from Miami, Lillian accelerated. Ernie called me 2 days after the trust paperwork started. Dad, Lillian needs a power of attorney. She says that to organize everything for the wedding, sign contracts with vendors, make reservations, she needs to be able to act on my behalf. I let him finish. Then I answered calmly, Ernie, we go to the lawyer together. That's my condition. I'm not asking you not to give her your signature. I'm asking that when you go, I am there. Silence. Why? Because I'm your father, and I know how to read legal documents. And because the signatures you give in a hurry are the ones that cost you the most later. Ernie agreed. I called Rachel that same afternoon to let her know that if Ernie and Lillian tried to walk into any notary or law office in the coming days, I needed to know about it beforehand. Rachel took note. Mallory Vance kept showing up at the house, always with some polite excuse. Dropping off something, Lillian forgot some attention, asking if I had made a decision on the wedding budget, checking on my plants. That last visit was the one that entertained me the most internally. Mallory looking at the peppers with the same expression people use to look at abstract art, convinced there's something there. but having no idea what. During that visit, I left a piece of paper highly visible on the living room side table. It looked like the header of a residential lease agreement. Tenant name, Frank Sullivan. Subject property, Pasadena, California. It was a copy of an old contract from when I rented a storage unit for my work equipment more than 10 years ago. Without reading the full text, just the header looked like I was renting the house. Like it wasn't mine, but someone else's. Mallory saw it. She read it with her eyes without moving her head, using that technique of someone trying to look like they aren't reading. She took a mental note. She left 20 minutes later. That night, Rachel confirmed what I had imagined. Lillian had called her title fixer to give him an update. Monroe, who was still running surveillance, caught the movement. Lillian and her contact met again, and in that meeting, as Monroe was able to verify, the urgency had dropped a notch. The fixer was talking less about properties in Pasadena and more about reviewing everything thoroughly before proceeding. The fake lease agreement trap had worked perfectly as a decoy. Lillian believed the house wasn't mine, that the primary target had vanished. That would give her extra time to make her next mistake. That Sunday, I went to the Southern California Capsaicin Society meeting at the Farmers Market. I've been going to those meetings for months, and rarely have I felt as much in my element as I did that afternoon. We are 10, maybe 12 people sitting around a long table with pepper samples, soil and seeds, talking about pH levels, nighttime temperatures, which varieties need more shade and which thrive under pressure. There's no drama, no lies. Every plant does exactly what its nature dictates. Someone asked about my datil pepper that I'd mentioned weeks ago. It finally set its second fruit, I said. Took longer than usual, but it came out firm. And the black cobra, that one always knows what it's doing. You just can't rush it. Nobody asked anything else. There was no need to explain. When I got home, I found 2 texts from Ernie. One asking if they could come over the following weekend to talk as a family, and another, sent 40 minutes later, that just said, "We're not coming." Lillian changed plans. "Are you okay, Dad?" I replied that yes, I was fine, and that whenever he wanted to come over, the door was open. I put my phone away and sat down at the computer. I opened my appraisal notebook and reviewed the points. Trust in progress. 3 weeks to completion. Certified copy of the Florida marriage certificate in transit, 10 to 14 days. Robert Ellis's affidavit. Received and filed. Phoenix court docket. Printed and verified. Ghost event agency. Documented. Shady title fixer. Identified and under surveillance. The list had 8 points. 7 were moving forward. The 8th, the certified copy of the certificate, was the one that would hold everything else up. That night, just past 10, a text came in from Monroe. A new picture from the same restaurant in downtown LA. Lillian and the title fixer. Second meeting. This time Monroe had managed to get closer. On the edge of the folders laid out on the table, you could clearly read the title of the main document. Purchase and sale agreement. The subject property described on the cover page, Pasadena, California, my house. Monroe wrote at the end, they're prepping the draft. They think they can force Ernie's signature after the wedding as part of community property. They don't know about the trust. I read it. I locked my phone, went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stood for a moment by the window looking out at the patio. The black cobra had 3 new shoots since last week. 3, that doesn't happen if you rush it. The trust would be finalized in 10 days. The certified copy from Miami would arrive at roughly the same time, and when both documents were in my hands, Lillian Vance was going to discover that she had been planning to buy a property that legally could no longer be sold, signed over by a man who legally could no longer marry her. Everything at the exact same time, no rushing. The exact right dose. Monroe's full report arrived the day after his late-night text, in a sealed envelope delivered by courier to Rachel's office. She called me at 9 in the morning to tell me she had new material and that it was worth seeing in person. I arrived at her office on Colorado Boulevard before 10. Rachel had the open envelope on her desk and an expression I had learned to read over the previous weeks. The look of someone who found exactly what they were looking for, but knows the next steps have to be taken very carefully. Monroe had documented Lillian's meeting with the title fixers in enough detail to confirm the exact scheme. The draft of the purchase agreement listed the buyer as a 31-year-old woman with an address in Glendale, a friend of Mallory's. According to the background check, Monroe ran in parallel. The sale price stipulated in the draft was $2.6 million, notably below the appraised value of $3.4 million, and miles away from the true market value, which hovered around $4.7 million in that specific corridor of Pasadena, an undervalued sale to a third party with the spouse's signature based on community property laws. By the time Ernie realized what he had signed, the property would already be recorded under someone else's name. Lillian's problem, which she didn't know was a problem, was that the house was no longer sellable under those conditions. The irrevocable trust that Paul Evans had filed with the county recorder the week prior established that any act of disposition regarding the property required the express authorization of the fiduciary. Without that authorization, no title company or lawyer in the United States could execute the sale. The draft contract they were preparing was paper that wouldn't be worth more than the paper it was printed on. "When does the certified copy from Florida arrive?" I asked. Rachel checked her planner this afternoon. "I requested it expedited. It got here faster than expected." "Good. When you have it, call me." I walked out onto the street with that clarity that appears when all the data in an appraisal finally squares up. It wasn't exactly satisfaction. It was something closer to the certainty that the job was done right. Rachel's call came at 4 in the afternoon. "Frank, I have the certificate in my hands. Lillian Vance entered into a civil marriage with Isaac Parker on April 17th, 7 years ago, in Miami, Florida. The certificate has a folio number, the county seal, and the registrar's signature. There is no record of divorce, legal separation, or annulment in the registries of Florida, California, or the 4 additional states we checked. The marriage is active. I listened to the details. Then I said, scan it and send it to me right now. Keep the original locked in your office. Of course, when do you want to make your move? Tomorrow. Book me a table at Houston's for 2 p.m., one that isn't visible from the main street." I hung up and dialed Ernie's number. "Tomorrow we're having lunch together, just the 2 of us. Can you make it?" A pause. "Is something wrong, Dad?" "Yes, but it's something you need to know before something else goes wrong." The next day I arrived at the restaurant before him. Houston's in Pasadena. It smells the way a proper steakhouse should smell, like hickory smoke, roasted meat, and thyme. I asked for a table in the back, far from the entrance. I ordered sparkling water and waited. Ernie arrived on time, wearing the face of someone who doesn't know if he's walking into good news or something terrible. He sat down. I gave him a moment to get settled. Then I placed 3 documents on the table: the printout of the Phoenix civil docket, the notarized affidavit from Robert Ellis, and the certified copy of the marriage certificate from Florida. I pointed to the last one. "Lillian is married, Ernie. Legally married for 7 years. The marriage was never dissolved. If you 2 got married, you'd be committing a felony without knowing it. It's called bigamy. It's a criminal matter." The color in my son's face took about 3 seconds to change. First, he went slightly pale. Then his eyes read the name on the certificate, Lillian Vance. His jaw tightened. "When did you find this out?" he asked in a very quiet voice. "I got the absolute confirmation yesterday. I suspected it for weeks, but without the certified certificate, I didn't want to tell you anything I couldn't prove." Ernie didn't say anything for a long moment. He looked at the documents one by one, like someone hoping the papers will change their contents if he stares at them long enough. "The 2 previous files," I continued, pointing to the other papers, "are the pattern. Phoenix, Las Vegas, and now here. Always the same scheme. Engagement, signed documents, transferred assets. And the money for the event agency," Ernie murmured. "And the power of attorney you were about to give her." Ernie closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, he had the expression of someone who just realized the fall he was taking was much, much longer than he thought. "I'm going to call her," he said, and he stood up from the table. He walked outside the restaurant. I stayed with my coffee, which was still hot, and the documents neatly arranged in front of me. I waited. 40 minutes later, Ernie sat back down. He had his phone in his hand and the look of someone who just received exactly what he expected, even if it wasn't what he wanted. She showed me a paper on a video call. She says the divorce is processing, that she has the stamped receipt of the petition. He handed me his phone. The screen showed a screenshot Ernie had captured from the video, a document with the official letterhead of the family court. I looked at it for about 10 seconds. The font type in the header didn't match the standard format used by family courts. The docket number had 1 digit too many, and the stamp in the lower right corner had a color gradient that official stamps don't have, because they are made with ink pads, not inkjet printers. "It's a forgery," I said. Ernie looked at me. "Are you sure?" "Completely." I put the phone down on the table. Ernie looked at it for a moment longer, then turned it face down. That same night, I called Rachel. "We have the forged document and the real certificate from Florida. How much time do you need to prep the criminal complaint for the district attorney? If you send me the photo of the forged document before 10 a.m., we'll have the filing ready by noon. You'll have it before 9. I sent the image that same night. At 8:40, Rachel confirmed receipt. At 9:20, she already had the brief in review. The criminal complaint for bigamy arrived at the DA's office the next day at 2 p.m., with 3 exhibits attached: the certified copy of the Miami marriage certificate, the comparative analysis of the forged document prepared by a forensic document examiner, whose services cost $600, and the notarized affidavit from Robert Ellis. 3 documents, 3 different sources, all pointing to the exact same conclusion. In parallel, Rachel initiated the filing for a civil suit for fraud, which included the request advance for the ghost event agency and the preparation of a purchase agreement on an asset that could not be legally sold. Filing two simultaneous actions, one criminal, one civil, wasn't the fastest route, but it was the most rock-solid. Rachel explained it in direct terms. The criminal action establishes the crime. The civil action recovers the damages. The two together close off all the exits. Ernie drafted the letter breaking off the engagement with Rachel's help. The text was brief and highly precise. It communicated the decision not to proceed with the marriage plans. It did not explicitly assign blame. Rachel insisted on that point, because any direct accusation could complicate the criminal process, and it placed on the record that there were no shared assets, no documents signed in Lillian's name, and no debt taken on her behalf. The letter was delivered by courier with a signed receipt confirmation. The reaction didn't take long. That same afternoon, while I was checking on the black cobra pepper on the patio, the doorbell rang twice, fast, with the insistence of someone hoping that noise alone can fix a problem. I opened the door. Mallory Vance was standing on the porch, leaning forward, with the eyes of someone who had spent hours rehearsing what she was going to say. Behind her, idling by the curb, was a car with the engine running. She had a bag slung over her shoulder, the strap gripped tightly, like someone preparing for a long, difficult conversation, or preparing to run at the first sign of trouble without having decided which one yet. "Mr. Sullivan," she started, with a voice that had more edge than politeness, "what you people are doing is an injustice. Lillian didn't do anything to you. You're destroying her reputation and her family's reputation, out of the jealousy of an old man who can't stand to see his son happy." I let her talk. She kept going for another minute, her volume steadily rising. That they were going to sue for defamation, that they had a lawyer, that Ernie knew perfectly well what he was doing when he got involved with Lillian, and that now he was trying to play the victim. Her voice trembled slightly at the very end, which told me she was running out of script. I waited 1 second after the silence fell. "Mallory," I said, "you have a lawyer." She blinked. "That's completely beside the point." "It is the point, because if your sister has a lawyer, tell him that the irrevocable trust on the Pasadena house was filed with the county recorder 3 weeks ago. The instrument number is at Paul Evans' office on Green Street. Any purchase agreement you attempt to execute on that property has absolutely zero legal standing. Any escrow officer who tries to process it would be operating against a legally recorded instrument that carries severe professional consequences." The car idling at the curb shut off. Mallory stopped leaning forward. Something interesting happened on her face. First fury, then calculation, then something that looked a lot like recognition, like someone who just realized the chessboard has a piece they hadn't seen. "This isn't over," she said, but with far less conviction than when she arrived. "You are well within your rights to proceed," I replied. "Have a good night." I closed the door. I stood there listening. It took the car about 40 seconds to start back up and drive away. I went to the kitchen, poured myself some water, and went back out to the patio. The black cobra had firm stems and that dark color that indicates a well-nourished plant. Plenty of patience. 2 days later, Monroe confirmed what I expected. The title fixer stopped answering Lillian's texts. According to the surveillance, the man had consulted his own attorney upon learning of the active criminal complaint. With an investigation for bigamy and fraud underway, no title officer in their right mind would keep playing along. The draft of the purchase agreement stayed in a drawer nobody was ever going to open again. That same week, the district attorney's office subpoenaed Lillian Vance for questioning. Rachel sent me the brief text I was waiting for. Summons issued. The process is moving, and that same day another text came from Monroe that I wasn't expecting. "Frank, I located Isaac Parker. He lives in Miami, Florida. 41 years old, owns his own business. He's doing fine. He has zero knowledge of any of the events in California. Awaiting instructions. I read it twice. I put my phone in my pocket. I went out to the garden. I watered the daytil pepper, which this week had finally finished ripening, that second fruit I'd been waiting on for weeks. I touched it with my fingertip. Firm, with the exact right weight. Ready. There was a man in Miami who had spent years looking for a way to close a door he couldn't close alone, who carried a situation that tied him to someone he didn't want to be tied to anymore. And I held in my hands the exact documentation he needed to get it done. I wasn't going to call him directly. That's not my style. And it wasn't necessary. I had the documents. I had the name of the lawyer he would need. And I had Rachel to make the delivery in a formal, proper manner. The next move wasn't mine. It belonged to someone in Florida who, without knowing it yet, was about to receive a package that would rewrite the end of this story. The package Rachel sent to Miami didn't include a long introductory letter or dramatic explanations. Just a formal cover letter with the law firm's letterhead addressed to Isaac Parker with 3 attached documents. The certified copy of his marriage certificate with Lillian Vance, the docket from the Phoenix litigation, and a summary of the events that had taken place in California over the last few months. At the bottom of the letter, a single paragraph. This information is shared for informational purposes only. No action or response is requested. The sender has no relationship with the recipient beyond a shared interest in the documented facts. Rachel called me 2 days later with news I honestly didn't expect to receive so soon. "Frank," Isaac Parker responded, "not in writing." He called the office directly. He's been trying to get a divorce for 2 years. Lillian was demanding $100,000 as a community property settlement. He refused. She stonewalled the process. The file has been paralyzed in a Miami family court because she won't show up to the hearings, and he had no way to prove a history that would justify a divorce without that payout. "Until now," I said, "until now." His lawyer filed an update to the docket with the documents we sent. He included Robert Ellis's affidavit and the analysis of the forged document. With that, the court in Miami has more than enough to grant the divorce based on fraudulent conduct, with zero financial settlement. I put my phone away and stood for a moment looking at the patio. The black cobra pepper had pushed out the first fruits of the season, dark, firm, with that specific shine that indicates the process finished exactly how it was supposed to finish. That week, Lillian tried the only thing she had left to try. Ernie called me to say he had received 43 text messages from her in a single day. Some begged for forgiveness, others threatened to sue for emotional distress. The last few were from a different number, possibly Mallory's, with the same content but a heavier tone of warning. Ernie read one of the messages to me out loud, with the inflection of someone who doesn't know whether to laugh or worry. "What do I do, Dad? Did you answer any of them?" "No." "Then you already did the right thing. Don't touch anything." Ernie didn't answer the 44 messages the next day either. What he did do, a few days later, was to show up at my front door on a Sunday afternoon with a bag of groceries. Garlic, a beautiful cut of beef, brisket, hickory rub. He told me he wanted to learn how to smoke the brisket. That he had always eaten mine, but had never paid attention to the process. We spent the afternoon in the kitchen and out by the smoker. I taught him the correct order. First the trim, then the binder, then the dry rub, then the low, slow heat. I explained why you wrap it halfway through. He asked questions, I answered. We didn't talk about Lillian, or legal documents, or title companies. We talked about the brisket. When we finished and you could smell it from the hallway, Ernie said, "Why didn't you ever teach me this before?" "You never asked?" Rachel informed me that same week that the title fixer had received a formal reprimand from the State Bar of California. He hadn't lost his license yet. The disciplinary process takes time, but his name was under review, and his participation in any transaction linked to this case would expose him to massive consequences. Monroe confirmed that the man had canceled all pending contracts related to the Vances. Mallory stopped coming around the neighborhood. Monroe tracked her to an address in Glendale, where she was apparently renting a room. No news of movements toward any title offices. No meetings with fixers. Paralyzed. Lillian appeared before the district attorney's office. Rachel wasn't present at that hearing. She wasn't part of the criminal process as a victim's representative at that stage, but formal channels confirmed that the appearance took place and that the process was moving forward. In the U.S. legal system, an investigation for bigamy and fraud doesn't resolve in weeks. It can take months. But the gears were already turning, and there was no way to stop them without Lillian either confessing to the facts or refuting them with documentation that, had it existed, she would have already presented. The week that Isaac Parker's lawyer submitted the updated file to the Miami court, I received a text from Rachel with a single line. Miami Family Court admitted the new documents. Hearing scheduled in 3 weeks, I replied, "Good. Close out the tracking on that front." That night, I went to the Southern California Capsaicin Society meeting. Someone brought a Merida pepper from Veracruz that nobody had seen before. Small, almost black, with a scent that mixed smoke and fruit. We tasted it with freshly made tortillas. The heat level was moderate, but the flavor lingered on the palate for a long time, with layers appearing slowly, one after another. Mr. Fuentes, who has been growing peppers for 20 years and measures his words as if he were charged by the syllable, tasted it and said, "Only this one doesn't warn you. It gets you later." I nodded. Exactly. 3 days later, Rachel called me with the final piece of the board, Frank. The investigator assigned to the case located a third plaintiff, a businessman from Phoenix who, 3 years ago, reached a private settlement with Lillian to close an asset dispute. The man's name is Arthur Montgomery, 72 years old. He agreed to give a formal affidavit. With 3 plaintiffs, the pattern is documented before the DA as a repeated offense. That upgrades the fraud charge significantly. When can he submit his testimony? Next week. I already contacted him. Good, go ahead. I hung up. I went to the desk. I opened the appraisal notebook for the last time. The list of 8 points I had written that first night had a check mark next to every single one. The 8th, Isaac Parker's testimony. I checked off that very afternoon. I closed the notebook. I locked it in the drawer. 2.5 months after that Sunday, with the beige folder on my embroidered tablecloth, I set the dining room table for two. Ernie arrived on time with a bottle of sparkling water and the face of someone who has finally rested after carrying something incredibly heavy. We sat down. I served the smoked brisket with a black cobra pepper reduction, the exact same pepper that had matured throughout this entire process. Slow, dark, unhurried. Lillian Vance had an active criminal investigation for bigamy and fraud, with 3 formal plaintiffs and rock-solid documentation across 2 states. The process would follow its rhythm. That's how this works. But there was no way to dismantle it anymore. The irrevocable trust on the Pasadena house was filed and impregnable. Not a single document of Ernie's had been signed in her favor. The draft of the purchase agreement they prepared never reached a title office. Isaac Parker got his divorce through the Miami family court, with zero financial settlement based entirely on the documents Rachel sent him. The 7-year marriage was dissolved without Lillian receiving a single dollar of what she had demanded. The title fixer was still under disciplinary review. Mallory Vance had left Los Angeles. Arthur Montgomery, the businessman from Phoenix, gave his formal testimony. With that, the file at the district attorney's office ceased to be an isolated case and became a fully documented pattern. Ernie ate in silence for a moment, then looked up. "Dad, when did you know she was dangerous?" "The first time I saw her." "And why didn't you say anything to me that day?" I put my fork down on my plate. "Because a suspicion without documents isn't information, it's damage. I had to know before I spoke." Ernie nodded slowly. Then he asked what I knew he was going to ask for weeks. "The 2 words you told me that Sunday when they went out to the garden." "I know. What exactly did you know?" "That something didn't add up. That the asking price didn't match the real value. In this business, that always means the same thing. There's a hidden defect that someone decided not to declare." Ernie stayed quiet for a moment. "She was asking for $2 million, he said, "for an asset worth 0. I replied, "In real estate, that's called a fraudulent overvaluation. The buyer loses everything, and the seller disappears." Silence. Then a smile I recognized. The same one he had as a kid when he finally understood something I had been waiting a long time for him to figure out on his own. "Thanks, Dad. There's nothing to thank me for. It's just what you do." We finished dinner without rushing. After coffee, Ernie washed the dishes, something he hadn't done since he was a teenager, and I went out to the patio to check the black cobra. The fruits of the season were ready, dark, firm, with the exact right weight. The trust remains, the house remains. And the Sunday table, whenever Ernie wants to sit down again, also remains. If you like this story, please drop a like on this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts on this story in the comments. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thanks for watching. Yeah.